So there was another scene in the movie where, well, basically, Colin, the boy, he wanted his father to come home because it was getting to the point where Mrs. Medlock was being very just, it was just a lot of suppression and a lot of just, it was giving manipulation. And Mrs. Medlock was basically trying to take over and send
The girl Mary?
to I think like a private boarding school or something like that. And he didn't want to go. He wanted to stay and be with the girl Mary and be in the garden and, just maintain his position, you know? And so he wanted his father to come home. But his father was far away, and his father was basically away because of the grief from losing his wife. And, basically the way the wife died, it was basically while um, his son was a baby. Colin was a baby. So he just felt a lot of guilt and shame from that, so he just never returned to home. Um, so Colin now wants his father to come home because he wants his father to rescue him from, having to be sent away.
I apologize for any confusion. It's actually Mary that's supposed to be sent away because Colin is still bedridden at this time.
So they go outside, the three of them, like the two boys and the girl, and they are around this fire. Now, it was kind of giving like chant to me, so it was a little bit like I wouldn't say it was necessarily um but basically what I got from this was um essentially them crying out. It was basically the boy crying out for his father. So to me, like prophetically, this was kind of like a prayer, you know. But it was kind of giving like chanty, but I know like prophetically it was representing prayer because they're around the fire and he was saying, "Bring my father home." So then I said in my notes, I feel like that represents the standard praying for the prodigal's return. Because the father left for 10 years, abandoning the garden and his son because of the grief. But after the prayer, the father had a dream where he was instructed to find his late wife with Colin in the garden. So yeah, so after Colin did that, I'll call it a prayer. Um, they were just believing that his father would come home, and that night his father had a dream, and his late wife was calling to him and saying that she's in the garden with Colin. So basically it was like prophetically this represents like you praying for your prodigal's return, and God is giving them dreams. God is giving them revelation. God is showing them where you are. God is showing them that they need you, or that you need them. God is leading them to come towards you. Because when the father in the movie, when he woke up from the dream, he said, "I must leave immediately." He had no rest in his spirit. He just knew that he had to go. So he got up immediately and went back home. And so this is what God is doing now. Like they're returning home, and God is giving them those dreams, and not letting them rest until the matter is settled. Um so then in my notes I said, so that lets me know, I was kind of praying as I wrote this. So I said, so that lets me know that you hear the prayers and you have no trouble speaking to the sons, and they are going to obey quickly and move quickly. So then another thing I said is that all of Mrs. Medlock's plots, plans, and attempts failed, and she ended up looking foolish. So basically, she wasn't in charge anymore. So, basically, once the father came back, he put Mrs. Medlock in her place, and he actually, like, low key fired her. So she was not in this position anymore where she could, do what she wanted and, have this control over Colin. So this really represents just like any plots or plans of the enemy. They're all going to fail. Anything that anyone has been doing to try to stop the will of God and try to stop, your spouse from being with you, or try to stop you from being with your spouse, or trying to hinder you being together, and doing what God calls you to do. All those things are going to fail, and they're going to end up looking foolish, and they're not going to be in charge anymore. They're not going to have this position where they can do these things anymore. um, and so when Colin's father did come home, basically when he found him, he was blind. He was in the garden and he was blindfolded. So he was with Mary and the other boy, and they were kind of playing around. They were like playing a little game. So basically, he was blindfolded and he was like trying to find them. And so in my notes, I said, like, I feel like that really speaks to the element of surprise. And just knowing that um, God does want to surprise you, so God wants you to expect the unexpected. Um, so yeah, going back to Mrs. Medlock not being in charge anymore, basically when the father came, Mrs. Medlock was supposed to be the one watching him and making sure that he was safe and things like that. She, when he came and he was asking where Colin was, she was like, "Oh, he's in his room," but he wasn't in his room because he escaped. And that also reminds me of the word I shared about crushed by the control of the counterfeit, the great escape, because, you know, the spouses have been under a lot of control. Like they've been um kind of subjected to people being controlling, Jezebel's spirit, all that stuff. People being manipulative and things like that, and trying to keep them stuck. And so she basically had him locked up in his room, and he had the girl locked up in her room. But they were able to escape, but she didn't realize it. So God is going to help them to escape any controlling situations, and it's going to be like right under their nose, but they're not going to be aware of it until they've already made it through. And so that's when I think the servant says, they might like he might be in the garden, and that's when the father goes to the garden to look for Colin. So Colin's blindfolded, and that's when the father finds him. And so again, just being expectant of that surprise. And then another thing I said in my notes is that earlier in the movie, Colin felt like his father didn't want to see him. But Mary countered that by saying, "What if he did?" And his father gazed at him while he was sleeping before he left. So these prodigals have had a love for their person even when we couldn't see it, even before the separation. So basically, his father came and wanted to see the girl because this was after she had first kind of came there, and he wanted to see her because she kind of looks like his late wife. But Colin believed that his father didn't want to see him, that he only wanted to see Mary. But, Mary tells him, like, what if he did want to see you? The thing is, his father went to see him that same day before he left, but he he saw him while Colin was sleeping. So Colin wasn't aware that his father saw him.
When it comes to the prodigal's relationship with their father, I felt like God doesn't love them, God doesn't care about them, God doesn't want to be with them, God doesn't see them, things like that. They may have just had these lies that they were believing about God, and that created distance between them and God.
When you think about like the father kind of representing like the prodigal, like we may have, like, if you're the stander, you may have felt like um that your person just doesn't want to see you, like they don't want to recognize, they don't want to like really accept who you are to them. um they don't want to be around you, they don't want to see you, things like that. But Mary says, what if he did? And um and so even when uh you weren't aware of it, God had already given them this love for you. God had already given them this deep inner knowing in their spirit that this is the one for you. And the Father does return, so even from the beginning, like, they may not have fully been able to see you because one person was sleeping, but there is going to be this reconciliation where you're both wanting to see each other and you're both aware, and it's a loving connection and reunion. So basically, so after Colin and his father have this reuniting, Mary, she kind of feels upset at first because she, now that Colin's dad is giving Colin all this love, she feels like nobody loves her, because even though she grew up with her parents for most of her life, her parents were not really, they didn't really care about her, so she never really felt loved by like a parent. So then the uncle, Colin's father, comes and talks to her, and he basically kind of embraces her, and he tells her that basically she brought him, and she brought Colin, and she brought the garden back to life. I just thought that was significant because God has been talking about like resurrection and bringing life to what looks dead and restoration. And God is doing that. And God is even using you as the standard to bring things back to life. God may have been leading you into prayer and fasting and your faith, um, your faith can move mountains. And you just loving on your spouse and believing in them, and just sowing those seeds of faith, like, you have brought them back to life. Like, you, even when this promise looks dead, like, God is bringing it back to life. And you partnering with God is really just bringing life to this promise. And so people believe that everything in the garden was dead, but even but it was still being tended to before it was in full bloom. And then I said there was a time of waiting as well after the seeds were planted, but when everything was blooming, there was also animals that gave birth. So it was basically kind of like a Garden of Eden almost. Um, People believe that everything in the garden was dead, but before the garden bloomed, it was still being tended to. Like, even after the aunt and the wife died, there was a man that worked for their family, and his basically before the aunt died, she asked him to keep tending to the garden. Then Mary and the boy, they plant the seeds in the garden, but before the garden bloomed and looked very beautiful and everything like that, there was this time of waiting. And so just know that if you're in this time of waiting, know that there is going to be a harvest. There is going to be this blooming and this blossoming that happens. Um, and just know that, you know, those seeds that were planted, there's going to be a harvest for your seed. And there were also animals that gave birth. So, so just know that with this promise being birthed, it's going to lead to so many other births as well. It's going to bring life to so much more than just you. So that's why it's so significant, and that's why it's been so attacked, and so there's just been so much weight to it. But yeah, it's going to lead to even more births. There were animals that gave birth. And there was just so much life that came about from the seeds that they planted. And so just know that that is what's going to happen for you, even as you have been planting your seeds of faith.